The fluorescent light above the conference table buzzed like a dying wasp, casting that particular shade of corporate pallor that made everyone look either jaundiced or already dead. The air conditioning kicked in with its familiar wheeze pumping needle-cold air that raised goosebumps on my forearms despite the long sleeves. I counted my breaths, 1, 2, 3, the way I always did when the walls started closing in. Sarah Chen. My name hung in the recycled air like a summons. I looked up from my tablet, where I'd been reviewing the quarterly compliance reports, the ones that showed we were actually ahead of target for the first time in 18 months. The ones that should have been good news. Marcus Steinberg, our new Chief Operations Officer, sat at the head of the polished glass table, his expensive suit jacket draped over the back of his chair. 6 weeks on the job, and he'd already rearranged the entire org chart twice. His smile was the kind you practiced in mirrors, wide, confident, completely hollow. "I've been reviewing your position," he said, tapping his Mont Blanc pen against a manila folder. The sound echoed off the glass walls like a metronome counting down to something I didn't want to hear. "Tell me, what exactly does an operations analyst do around here?" The question landed like a slap. I'd been doing this job for 4 years. I'd streamlined vendor contracts, identified cost savings that kept us profitable through 2 market downturns, and built compliance systems that passed every audit. But the way he asked it, with that slight tilt of his head and the barely contained smirk, made it sound like I'd been sitting in a corner playing solitaire. "I oversee compliance tracking, vendor management, and operational efficiency metrics," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Last quarter alone, I identified $200,000 in redundant software licenses and renegotiated 3 major service contracts that saved us." Right. He waved his hand dismissively. "But see, that's what I'm getting at. In today's business environment, we need to be more strategic, more forward-thinking." He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking softly. "I'm implementing some changes, efficiency improvements. Nothing personal, you understand." The silence stretched between us like a held breath. Through the glass walls, I could see other employees at their desks, heads down, pretending they weren't watching this play out. In the distance, someone's phone rang and went to voicemail. "What kind of changes?" I asked. Marcus opened the folder and slid a document across the table. The paper made a soft whisking sound against the glass surface. "Performance improvement plan," he said. "Standard procedure. 30 days to demonstrate enhanced value add to the organization." I stared at the PIP paperwork. The corporate letterhead seemed to mock me with its crisp professionalism. A performance improvement plan was usually the kiss of death, a paper trail that led straight to termination. In 4 years, I'd never had so much as a negative performance review. "This seems sudden," I said. "My last review was excellent. I've exceeded every metric. Past performance doesn't guarantee future results." The phrase rolled off his tongue like he'd said it 100 times before. Markets change. Companies evolve. We need team members who can adapt. He stood up, buttoning his jacket with practiced ease. 30 days, Sarah. I'm sure you'll figure something out. You strike me as resourceful." The conference room door closed behind him with a soft pneumatic hiss, leaving me alone with the humming fluorescent light and the taste of ozone from the ventilation system. I sat there for a moment, staring at the PIP document, feeling the weight of 26 floors of steel and glass pressing down on me. I'd always believed that if you followed the rules, worked hard, and did your job well, the system would protect you. It was a nice theory. Too bad it was complete bullshit. The elevator ride down to the 15th floor felt longer than usual. The numbers descended in red digital clarity: 22, 21, 20, each floor A small death, each ding a countdown. I needed to think, and I needed coffee. The break room on 15 was always quieter than the one on my floor. Fewer people, less chatter, and most importantly, it was where Dave Kowalski usually took his afternoon coffee break. Dave was our facilities engineer, the kind of guy who knew every pipe wire and square inch of our 30-story building. If the HVAC system hiccuped, Dave felt it in his bones. If a vendor was cutting corners on maintenance, Dave's records would show the pattern. In my experience, facilities engineers were the closest thing to omniscient beings in the corporate world. I found him standing next to the coffee machine, holding a ceramic mug that read, "World's Okayest Engineer." His coveralls were clean but worn, and he had that particular 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd spent the morning fixing other people's problems. "Rough day?" he asked, noting my expression. "Getting rougher." I poured coffee into my own mug, a plain white one I'd stolen from a conference room 2 years ago. The liquid was bitter and probably hours old, but it was hot and it was caffeine. "Can I ask you something?" "Shoot." "The new COO, Marcus Steinberg. What do you know about him?" Dave's expression shifted slightly the way it did when someone mentioned a vendor who'd been cutting corners. "Why do you ask?" "Just trying to get a read on him. You hear things working in facilities. People don't always notice the guy checking the air filters." He chuckled softly. "True enough." He took a sip of his coffee, considering. "Well, he's been asking a lot of questions about building access logs, badge entries, maintenance schedules, vendor contracts, real specific stuff." "What kind of specific?" "Like which contractors have after-hours access? Which departments have the highest facilities costs? Who's been putting in work orders for ergonomic equipment?" He paused. "That kind of thing usually means one thing. Cost cutting, cost cutting." He nodded, though something seems off about it. Like last week, he had me pull all the records for accessible workspace modifications we've done in the past 2 years. ADA-compliant stuff, standing desks, special lighting. That's not usually where you look to save money. That's where you go to get yourself sued. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Did he say why he needed those records? "Efficiency review," he said. "Making sure we're not spending money on unnecessary accommodations." Dave made air quotes with his free hand. His words, not mine. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. There was only one person in our department who'd requested multiple workplace accommodations in the past year. Jessica Martinez, our accounting specialist. Jessica had rheumatoid arthritis, and the company had installed a height-adjustable desk, ergonomic keyboard, and special lighting at her workstation. All perfectly reasonable, all legally required, and all, apparently, on Marcus Steinberg's radar. "Dave," I said carefully, "hypothetically, if someone wanted to challenge those accommodation expenses, what kind of records would they need? Medical documentation, work order requests, vendor invoices, maybe employee productivity metrics." He frowned. "But that would be a pretty shitty thing to do, not to mention legally risky." "Yeah," I said, "it would be." The coffee suddenly tasted like ash. I dumped the rest down the sink and headed back upstairs, my mind racing. A performance improvement plan. For me, a sudden interest in accommodation expenses, efficiency reviews that targeted the most vulnerable employees. It wasn't personal, Marcus had said, but it was starting to look like it was very personal indeed. The 15th floor was always quieter in the afternoon when most people were either in meetings or fighting the post-lunch energy crash. I took the long way back to the elevator, my footsteps muffled by industrial carpet that smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals and despair. Past the empty cubicles, past the conference rooms, with their whiteboards covered in half-erased strategic initiatives, past the corner office where someone was having a hushed phone conversation that sounded like an argument. The elevator arrived with its familiar ding, and I stepped inside just as my phone buzzed. A text from my mom. "How's work going, honey?" I stared at the message for a moment, watching the floor numbers climb. How was work going? "Well, Mom, I'm apparently being railroaded by a COO who seems to enjoy targeting people who can't fight back. But thanks for asking." Instead, I typed back, "Fine, busy day." The elevator doors opened on my floor with another pneumatic whisper. The familiar sounds of office life washed over me, keyboards, clicking phones, ringing, the low murmur of conversations that stopped just short of being actual communication. I walked past the reception desk, where Sandra was typing furiously, her acrylic nails creating a rapid-fire percussion against her keyboard. "Sarah," she called out, without looking up. "Marcus wants to see you in his office. 10 minutes. My blood pressure spiked. "Did he say what about—" "Nope, just said to send you up when you got back." Marcus's office was on the 28th floor in what used to be called Executive Country before they started calling it the Leadership Suite. The elevator ride up felt like being slowly compressed in a vice. 26, 27, 28. The doors opened onto a hallway that smelled like expensive carpet and subtle air freshener, not the industrial strength stuff they used on the lower floors, but something that probably cost more per ounce than my hourly wage. His assistant, a young woman whose name I'd never learned, looked up from her computer with the kind of polite smile that never reached the eyes. "Go right in," she said. "He's expecting you." Marcus's office was twice the size of the conference room where he'd ambushed me earlier. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the city that was probably worth more than my annual salary. The desk was some kind of dark wood that gleamed under strategically placed lighting, and the chairs were the kind of Italian leather that made soft sighing sounds when you sat down. He was on the phone when I walked in, gesturing with his free hand while speaking in the kind of measured tones that suggested the conversation was important, or at least expensive. "No, I understand the timeline," he was saying. "But we need to move faster on this. Every day we wait is money walking out the door." He glanced at me and held up one finger. Right, right, well, make it work. That's what we pay you for." He hung up and turned his attention to me with that practiced smile. "Sarah, thanks for coming up. Please sit." I chose the chair closest to the door, a tactical decision that my paranoid brain made without conscious input. The leather was soft and expensive, and I hated how comfortable it was. "I wanted to follow up on our conversation earlier," he said, settling back in his own chair, "about the performance improvement plan." "I've been thinking about that," I said, "and I'm not sure I understand the basis for it. My performance reviews have been consistently excellent. I've met or exceeded every metric in my job description." That's exactly what I wanted to discuss. He opened a folder on his desk, a different one from this morning, thicker with more papers. "See, that's the problem with metrics. They tell you what happened, not what's going to happen. And frankly, your role, it's become somewhat redundant." The word hung in the air like a noose. Redundant. The corporate euphemism for unnecessary, for disposable. "How so?" I asked. "Well, take vendor management. We're moving toward automated procurement systems that eliminate the need for manual oversight. Compliance tracking is being integrated into our new ERP system, and efficiency metrics." He shrugged. "That's really more of a C-suite function now." Each word was carefully chosen, precisely delivered. This wasn't a spontaneous conversation. This was a script. "So you're eliminating my position," I said. I'm right-sizing the organization for maximum efficiency, he corrected. It's nothing personal, it's just business. I felt a familiar rage building in my chest, the kind that made my hands shake and my vision narrow. But I kept my voice steady. And Jessica Martinez, is her position being right-sized too? Something flickered across his face, surprise maybe, or annoyance that I'd connected the dots so quickly. I'm not sure what you mean. The accommodation expense reviews, the questions about ergonomic equipment and ADA compliance costs. He leaned forward slightly, his smile sharpening. That's exactly the kind of thinking that's holding this company back. You see discrimination where I see accountability. Every expense needs to be justified in today's market. Even the special requests. The way he said special requests made my skin crawl. Like Jessica's legally mandated workplace accommodations were some kind of charity case. Like her need for ergonomic equipment was a personal failing rather than a medical necessity. Those aren't special requests, I said. They're legal requirements that cost money, he countered. And money that doesn't directly contribute to productivity is money we can't afford to waste. I stared at him across the polished expanse of his desk, understanding something fundamental about Marcus Steinberg for the first time. He wasn't just incompetent or misguided. He was dangerous. The kind of person who would systematically dismantle protections and safeguards in the name of efficiency, leaving a trail of casualties in his wake. The 30 days, I said. Is that negotiable? I'm afraid not. Company policy. He closed the folder with a soft snap. But look on the bright side. 30 days is plenty of time to find something new. And I'd be happy to provide a reference. Assuming, of course, that everything goes smoothly. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Play ball, don't make waves, and maybe I'd get a lukewarm recommendation. Fight back, and I'd get nothing but a reputation as a troublemaker. I stood up the leather chair, sighing softly as I rose. I'll be in touch. I'm sure you will. The elevator ride back down felt different this time. Instead of the crushing weight of defeat, I felt something else building in my chest. Something focused and determined and maybe a little bit dangerous. Marcus Steinberg wanted to play games with people's livelihoods. He wanted to hide behind policy and procedure while targeting the most vulnerable people in the organization. He thought he was dealing with someone who would roll over and accept whatever he dished out. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The accounting department was on the 14th floor, a sprawling maze of cubicles and filing cabinets that hummed with the constant sound of adding machines and printer fans. I found Jessica at her workstation, her ergonomic keyboard clicking softly as she worked her way through a stack of invoices. The special lighting Dave had installed cast a warm, even glow over her desk, eliminating the harsh shadows that triggered her migraine headaches. "Hey, Jess," I said, pulling up a chair from the neighboring cube. "Got a minute?" She looked up with a smile that made the fluorescent pallor of the office seem a little less oppressive. Jessica was one of those people who somehow managed to bring warmth and humanity to the most sterile corporate environment. She kept photos of her kids on her desk, brought homemade cookies for everyone's birthday, and had a laugh that could be heard 3 cubicles away. "Sure," she said. "What's up?" I glanced around to make sure we weren't being overheard. The accounting department was usually a safe place for private conversations, too much ambient noise from equipment, and most people were too focused on their own work to eavesdrop. But paranoia was becoming a survival skill. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Have you had any interactions with Marcus Steinberg recently?" Her expression shifted, the smile fading. "The new COO, not directly." "Why, what about indirectly?" She was quiet for a moment, her hands resting on the ergonomic keyboard. Last week, someone from HR came by asking questions about my workspace setup. Said it was routine part of some efficiency review. My heart sank. What kind of questions? How often I use the special equipment? Whether it was really necessary? Whether I'd be willing to consider alternatives? She looked down at her hands, which showed the subtle swelling and stiffness that came with rheumatoid arthritis. I told them everything was medically necessary and legally required. They said they understood, but what? But they wanted copies of all my medical documentation. And they asked about my productivity metrics. How many invoices I process per day, error rates, that kind of thing. I felt the cold certainty of someone watching a train wreck in slow motion. Did they say why they needed that information? Compliance audit, they said, making sure all accommodations are properly documented. She met my eyes. Sarah, is there something I should be worried about? I considered lying, giving her some reassuring corporate speak about routine procedures and nothing to worry about. But Jessica deserved better than that. She deserved the truth. I think Marcus is building a case to challenge your accommodations, I said. Maybe even your position. The color drained from her face. Can he do that? Not legally. But that doesn't mean he won't try. I leaned closer, lowering my voice. Jess, I need you to do something for me. I need you to gather every piece of documentation related to your accommodations. Medical records, HR requests, work orders, vendor invoices, everything, and make copies. Why? Because if he comes after you, we're going to be ready. She nodded slowly, understanding passing between us, without words. Jessica had been fighting bureaucratic battles her entire adult life. Insurance companies, medical providers, employers who saw her condition as an inconvenience rather than a reality. She knew how to document everything, how to build an unshakable paper trail. What about you? She asked. Are you in trouble too? Performance improvement plan. I said, 30 days to prove my value to the organization. That's bullshit, she said, and the rare profanity from someone as consistently positive as Jessica made it hit harder than any angry rant. You've saved this company more money than half the executives combined. Thanks, I said. But money doesn't seem to be the real issue here. I was about to elaborate when I heard the familiar sound of expensive shoes on industrial carpet. Marcus Steinberg was walking through the accounting department, his suit jacket perfectly tailored, his smile perfectly calibrated for maximum charm. He moved between the cubicles like a politician working a crowd, stopping to make small talk with various employees. Ladies, he said when he reached our corner, his eyes fixed on Jessica's workstation, taking in the ergonomic setup with what looked like casual interest. How's everything going down here in the numbers department? Fine, Jessica said, her voice carefully neutral. Good, good. He gestured toward her adjustable desk. That's quite a setup you have there. Very comprehensive. The word landed like a small grenade. Comprehensive, as if the basic accommodations required by law were somehow excessive. It helps me do my job, Jessica said. I'm sure it does. His smile never wavered. Well, keep up the good work, both of you. Jessica, I believe someone from HR will be reaching out to you soon. Just some routine follow-up. He moved on to the next cubicle, leaving behind the lingering scent of expensive cologne and veiled threats. Jessica and I sat in silence for a moment, watching him work his way through the department like a virus spreading through a network. He's really going to do it, isn't he? She whispered. Yeah, I said, I think he is. But what Marcus didn't realize was that he'd just made a fatal tactical error. He'd shown his hand in front of a witness. More importantly, he'd shown his hand in front of someone who'd spent 4 years learning how to track every expense, every vendor contract, and every policy change that moved through this organization. It was time to start building a file. The Treasury Department was tucked away on the 12th floor in a corner that most people forgot existed. It was the kind of place where money came and went in electronic transfers and spreadsheet entries managed by people who understood the flow of corporate finances better than anyone wanted to admit. If you needed to know where money was really going, you didn't ask the executives. You asked the people who cut the checks. Elena Vasquez had been handling accounts payable and expense reimbursements for 8 years, which made her practically ancient in corporate time. She was the kind of person who caught duplicate invoices, noticed when vendor contracts changed, and could tell you exactly when a particular expense category started trending upward. She was also crucially someone that most of the executive team completely ignored. I found her in her windowless office, surrounded by filing cabinets and the soft hum of computer equipment. Her desk was covered with the controlled chaos of someone who tracked thousands of financial transactions, color-coded folders, printouts with handwritten notes, and a calculator that looked old enough to be considered vintage. "Sarah," she said, looking up from a spreadsheet that filled 2 monitors. "What brings you to the financial dungeons?" "I need a favor," I said, "and it might be the kind of favor that gets complicated." Elena leaned back in her chair, which creaked softly under the movement. She was somewhere in her 50s, with graying hair, and the kind of direct gaze that came from years of catching discrepancies that other people missed. "Complicated how? I need to trace some expense patterns. Specifically, I need to know if anyone has been analyzing accommodation costs, vendor contracts for ergonomic equipment, things like that. Are we talking about official budget analysis or someone fishing around where they shouldn't be?" "Probably the second one." She was quiet for a moment, her fingers drumming against the desk. "This wouldn't have anything to do with our new COO, would it?" "Why do you ask?" "Because he's been requesting a lot of financial reports lately. Very specific stuff. Not the usual executive summary bullshit, but line-item details, vendor breakdowns, employee-specific expenses." She turned back to her computer. "Hang on a second." Her fingers flew across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. Windows opened and closed, spreadsheets materialized and disappeared. The soft clicking of keys was the only sound in the small office. "Here," she said, pointing to one of her monitors. 3 weeks ago, he requested a detailed breakdown of all accommodation-related expenses for the past 2 years. Medical equipment, ergonomic furniture, accessibility, modifications, the works. I leaned closer to read the screen. The numbers told a story, but not the one Marcus probably thought they did. The total accommodation expenses for the entire company were less than what we spent on coffee and catered meetings. Jessica's ergonomic setup had cost less than a single business dinner. "This is nothing," I said. "These expenses are tiny." "That's what I thought," Elena said. But then he came back asking for productivity metrics cross-referenced with accommodation costs, like he was trying to build some kind of cost-benefit analysis. "Did you give him that information?" "I gave him what I could. But here's the thing, productivity metrics aren't really my department, and some of the information he wanted would require access to HR files that I don't have." She turned to face me fully. "Sarah, what's really going on here?" I looked around the small office at the filing cabinets and the computer equipment and the woman who'd been quietly tracking the financial heartbeat of the company for nearly a decade. Elena deserved to know what she was getting into. "I think Marcus is planning to eliminate positions by targeting employees with accommodations," I said, "starting with me and Jessica Martinez." Elena's expression hardened. "Son of a bitch. The question is, can you help me prove it?" She turned back to her computer, her fingers already moving across the keyboard. Sarah, I've been doing this job long enough to see a lot of executives come and go. Most of them are incompetent. Some of them are assholes, but very few of them are actually evil. She pulled up another spreadsheet. This guy might be the exception. What do you mean? Look at this. She highlighted a series of entries on her screen. These are reimbursement requests he's submitted since he started. Lunch meetings, client dinners, business travel, all perfectly normal except for one thing. What? The dates. Half of these client meetings happened on weekends, or late at night, or during times when he was supposedly in other meetings. And the vendors. She clicked through to another screen. Some of these restaurants don't exist anymore. Some of them never existed at all. I stared at the screen, watching the pattern emerge. Fabricated expense reports, phantom vendors meetings that never happened. It was textbook fraud, small enough to fly under the radar, but systematic enough to add up to serious money. How much are we talking about, I asked. So far, maybe 15–20,000. Not huge by executive standards, but enough to get someone fired if it came to light. My mind was racing. Marcus was building a case against Jessica and me, based on legitimate expenses, while systematically defrauding the company himself. The hypocrisy was staggering, but more importantly, it was leverage. Eleanor, I said, how hard would it be to document all of this? Not hard at all. Everything's in the system, and I keep backup records of every transaction. She met my eyes. But if I do this, I need to know you're serious, because once we start down this road, there's no going back. I'm serious. Good. She turned back to her computer. Then let's catch ourselves a COO. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of carefully orchestrated research. Elena worked her way through expense reports and vendor records while I dove into policy documents and contract language. Dave provided building access logs and maintenance records that painted a picture of someone who spent more time out of the office than in it, despite claiming to be hands-on with operations. The pattern became clearer with each passing day. Marcus Steinberg was the kind of executive who talked about efficiency while systematically gaming the system for personal benefit. He preached accountability while avoiding any meaningful oversight of his own actions, and he targeted vulnerable employees while engaging in behavior that would get anyone else terminated immediately. But knowing the truth and proving it were two different things. We needed more than suspicions and circumstantial evidence. We needed documentation that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. We needed a smoking gun. The opportunity came sooner than expected. I was working late on a Friday evening, ostensibly putting together my response to the performance improvement plan, but actually organizing the growing file of evidence we'd compiled. The office was mostly empty, just the night cleaning crew and a few dedicated workaholics burning the midnight oil. The HVAC system had shifted to its after-hours mode, and the building had that particular quiet that comes when most of the human activity has drained away. My phone buzzed with a text from Dave. "You still in the building?" I replied, "Yeah, 14th floor. Why?" "Check your email. Sending you something interesting." A few minutes later, an email appeared in my inbox with a subject line that made my heart race: Badge Access Anomaly, M. Steinberg. I opened the attachment to find a detailed log of Marcus's building access over the past month. Date stamps entry and exit times, specific locations accessed. It was the kind of data that Dave could pull from the security system, but that most people didn't know existed. The pattern was damning. Marcus's badge showed him entering the building at times when he was supposedly in meetings with clients. He was accessing floors and departments that had nothing to do with his official responsibilities. And most importantly, he was using his executive access to enter areas after hours when no one else would be around to witness his activities. My phone rang. Dave's number. "Did you look at the log?" he asked without preamble. "Looking at it now," I said. "This is fucked up." "Yeah, I know." I could hear the tension in his voice. "Sarah, he's been accessing the HR records room multiple times. Always after hours, always when the department is closed." The implications hit me like a physical blow. HR records contained confidential employee information, medical documentation, performance reviews, salary details, accommodation requests. If Marcus was accessing those files without authorization, it wasn't just unethical, it was illegal. "How do you know he was in the HR records room specifically?" "Badge readers on every secure door," Dave said. "The system logs everything. And here's the kicker, he's been in there 3 times in the past 2 weeks. Always around 9 or 10 p.m., always staying for 30 to 45 minutes. I pulled up my calendar, cross-referencing the dates with my own timeline. The first unauthorized access was 2 days after my PIP meeting. The second was the day after he'd visited Jessica in accounting. The third was yesterday. "Dave," I said, "can you tell what specific files or systems he accessed once he was in the room? Not from the badge logs, but—" He paused. "You know the HR computers are connected to the main network, and the main network keeps activity logs. Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just saying that if someone hypothetically wanted to check network activity logs from the HR department, and if that someone hypothetically had administrative access to the building's IT systems," he let the sentence hang. "That would be hypothetically very interesting information." "Hypothetically, yes." We hung up, and I sat in the darkened office staring at the badge access log on my screen. The fluorescent lights above flickered slightly, creating momentary shadows that danced across the cubicle walls. In the distance, I could hear the soft hum of the cleaning crew's vacuum, a white noise that somehow made the silence feel deeper. My email chimed again. Another message from Dave, this one, with an attachment labeled "Network Activity, HR Department." I opened it with trembling fingers. The data was dense and technical, but the story it told was crystal clear. Marcus had accessed specific employee files during his after-hours visits to the HR records room. My file, Jessica's file, and half a dozen others, all employees who had accommodation requests, medical documentation, or other information that could be used to build termination cases. But here was the beautiful part: every access was logged with timestamps, IP addresses, and user credentials. The digital fingerprints were undeniable. Marcus Steinberg had been conducting unauthorized surveillance of employee records in direct violation of privacy laws, company policy, and basic human decency. I sat back in my chair, feeling a mixture of triumph and nausea. We had him. The evidence was overwhelming, documented, and legally actionable. But now came the hard part: figuring out how to use it. The smart play would be to take everything to HR or legal and let the system handle it. But the same system that was supposed to protect employees had already failed Jessica and me. HR had been complicit in the accommodation reviews, and legal would probably find a way to minimize the damage and sweep everything under the rug. No, this needed to be handled differently. This needed to be public, undeniable, and devastating. Marcus Steinberg had decided to play games with people's livelihoods. It was time to show him what happened when you played those games with the wrong person. The quarterly board meeting was scheduled for the following Wednesday. A room full of investors, executives, and stakeholders who collectively controlled the future of the company. It was the kind of forum where reputations were made and destroyed, where a single presentation could change the trajectory of careers. It was perfect. I spent the weekend putting together what I privately called the presentation, not the usual corporate PowerPoint, with meaningless buzzwords and aspirational graphics, but a methodical evidence-based deconstruction of Marcus Steinberg's brief but catastrophic tenure as COO. The expense fraud was documented with screenshots and vendor records. The unauthorized HR access was laid out with network logs and badge data. The systematic targeting of employees with accommodations was demonstrated through cross-referenced timelines and policy documents. Every claim was supported by multiple sources of evidence, every accusation backed by documentation that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. By Sunday evening, I had 43 slides that told a story of corruption, discrimination, and abuse of power. It was the kind of presentation that would either end Marcus Steinberg's career or mine, possibly both. Elena called me Monday morning with one final piece of the puzzle. "I found something," she said without preamble. "You know how I said the expense fraud was maybe 15 or 20,000? I was being conservative." "How conservative?" "Try 47,000 over 6 weeks, and that's just what I can document with certainty. There's probably more." I sat down hard in my desk chair. $47,000 was serious money. The kind of money that got people arrested, not just fired. "Eleanor, are you absolutely certain about these numbers?" "I've checked them 3 times. Cross-referenced every invoice, verified every vendor, traced every transaction. This isn't sloppy bookkeeping or honest mistakes. This is systematic fraud." "Can you put together a summary, something that shows the total impact?" "Already done. I'll email it to you in 5 minutes." The summary was devastating. Phantom vendors, inflated invoices, completely fabricated expenses. Marcus had been treating the company's expense account like his personal piggy bank, all while preaching fiscal responsibility and targeting employees for minor accommodation costs. Tuesday evening, I sat in my apartment, staring at the final version of the presentation on my laptop screen. The evidence was overwhelming. The case was airtight, and the board meeting was less than 18 hours away. But doubt crept in. During the quiet moments, the voice in my head that whispered about career suicide and burned bridges and the possibility that I was wrong about everything. My phone rang. Jessica's number. "Sarah," she said, and I could hear the tears in her voice. "They called me into HR today. They're eliminating my position." The doubt evaporated instantly. "When?" "End of the week. They said it was part of a restructuring initiative. Cost savings. They offered me a package, but—" Her voice broke. "Sarah, I can't afford to be unemployed. The medical insurance, the medications. I don't know what I'm going to do." "Jessica, listen to me. You're not losing your job. Not if I can help it. There's nothing you can do. They've made up their minds. We'll see about that." Wednesday morning arrived gray and cold, with the kind of autumn wind that cut through even the heaviest coat. I dressed carefully, professional, but not overly formal, authoritative, but not aggressive. The presentation was loaded on my laptop, backed up on 2 different flash drives, and uploaded to a cloud storage account in case everything else failed. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. in the executive conference room on the 30th floor. I arrived at 9:15, taking the elevator up past floors of employees who had no idea their futures were about to be decided by a PowerPoint presentation. The executive conference room was 3 times the size of the one where Marcus had ambushed me with the PIP. Wall-to-wall windows offered a panoramic view of the city, and the table was large enough to seat 20 people comfortably. Board members were already arriving, settling into leather chairs and making small talk over coffee and pastries. Marcus stood near the windows, presumably reviewing his own presentation materials. He was dressed impeccably, radiating the kind of confidence that came from believing you were untouchable. When he saw me enter the room, His expression shifted, slightly surprise maybe, or annoyance. "Sarah," he said, walking over with that practiced smile, "I wasn't expecting to see you here." "I requested time on the agenda," I said. "I have some operational insights that I think the board would find valuable." "Operational insights." The smile faltered slightly. "I wasn't aware you'd prepared a presentation." "It's been an interesting few weeks," I said. "I've learned a lot." He studied my face, looking for tells or signs of what I might be planning. But I'd been practicing my poker face for days, and I gave him nothing. "Well," he said finally, "I'm sure whatever you have to share will be illuminating." The meeting began with the usual corporate rituals: financial reports, strategic updates, market analysis. I sat quietly in my chair, laptop closed, watching the board members settle into the familiar rhythm of quarterly governance. Marcus presented his efficiency initiatives with polished confidence, highlighting cost savings and streamlined operations. He never mentioned the employee terminations or the accommodation reviews. He made it sound like corporate optimization, not human destruction. When he finished, the board chair looked around the table. "Any questions for Marcus before we move on?" This was my moment. "Actually," I said, standing up and opening my laptop, "I have some additional information that relates to the efficiency initiatives. With the board's permission, I'd like to present some operational findings." The board chair glanced at Marcus, who nodded with the kind of tight smile that suggested he was calculating damage control strategies. "Of course," the board chair said. "Please, go ahead." I connected my laptop to the projector, and the first slide appeared on the large screen at the front of the room. Simple text on a white background: operational integrity review findings and recommendations. "Over the past 3 weeks," I've conducted a comprehensive review of recent operational changes and their impact on organizational effectiveness. What I found was a pattern of behavior that represents both a financial and legal risk to the company." I clicked to the second slide, a timeline showing Marcus's hire date, the implementation of new policies, and the targeted reviews of specific employees. No accusations, yet just facts arranged in chronological order. The pattern begins with the systematic review of employees who have accommodation requests or other factors that could be characterized as expensive or inconvenient. Click. A slide showing Jessica's accommodation costs compared to other operational expenses. The numbers were stark. Her ergonomic equipment cost less than a single executive dinner. These reviews were conducted using unauthorized access to confidential HR records. Click. The badge access logs showing Marcus entering the HR records room after hours. Dates, times, duration of access. The data was undeniable. The room had gone completely silent. I could hear the soft hum of the HVAC system, the distant sound of traffic 30 floors below. Marcus was staring at the screen, his face pale. The unauthorized access included specific employee files, medical documentation, and performance records. Click. Network activity logs showing exactly which files had been accessed when and for how long. Each entry was a violation of privacy laws and company policy. This information was then used to build termination cases against targeted employees, including the elimination of Jessica Martinez's position effective Friday. I looked directly at Marcus, who was gripping the edge of the conference table. But perhaps most concerning is the pattern of expense fraud that accompanied these activities. Click. Elena's summary of fabricated expenses, phantom vendors, and inflated invoices. $47,000 in 6 weeks, documented with meticulous precision. The slide hung in the air like an indictment. Board members leaned forward, reading the numbers, cross-referencing the supporting documentation. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable, then unbearable. Finally, the board chair spoke. Marcus, would you like to respond to these allegations? Marcus stood slowly, his usual composure completely shattered. These are serious accusations. I would need time to review the evidence and provide a proper response. The evidence is quite detailed, said another board member, an older woman with silver hair and sharp eyes. Are you suggesting that these records are inaccurate? I'm suggesting that there may be misinterpretations taken out of context. Which part is taken out of context? I asked. The badge access logs, the network activity records, the expense reports with your signature. He turned to face me, and for a moment, the polished executive mask slipped entirely. What I saw underneath was petty, vindictive, and desperate. You have no idea what you're dealing with, he said. Actually, I said, I think I do. I clicked to the final slide. A single sentence in large, bold text. Recommendation, immediate termination, and referral to appropriate law enforcement agencies. The room erupted in hushed conversations. Board members huddled together, reviewing printed copies of the evidence I distributed. The board chair called for a brief recess, and Marcus stormed out of the room, his expensive shoes clicking angrily against the marble floor. 20 minutes later, the board reconvened. Marcus was not invited back. Sarah, the board chair, said, "The board has reviewed your presentation and supporting documentation. We find the evidence compelling and the allegations credible. Effective immediately, Marcus Steinberg's employment with this company is terminated. Additionally, we will be referring this matter to both law enforcement and our legal department for further action." She paused, looking directly at me. "We also want to formally apologize for the environment that allowed this situation to develop. Jessica Martinez's position will be immediately reinstated, and we will be conducting a comprehensive review of all recent policy changes and employee actions." I nodded, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and vindication. "Thank you. One more thing," she said. "We'd like to offer you Marcus's position as interim COO while we conduct a proper search for a permanent replacement." The offer hung in the air like a gift I wasn't sure I deserved. 6 weeks ago, I'd been facing a performance improvement plan and potential termination. Now, I was being offered the job of the man who'd tried to destroy me. "I appreciate the offer," I said, "but I think I'd prefer to remain in operations. There's still a lot of work to do to repair the damage." The board chair smiled. "We respect that decision, but please know that the offer stands." As the meeting dispersed and board members filed out of the conference room, I remained at the table, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city below. The HVAC system hummed its familiar tune, and somewhere in the distance I could hear the soft ding of elevator doors opening and closing. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "I heard the news. Thank you. Doesn't seem like enough." I typed back, "Just doing my job." But it was more than that, and we both knew it. It was about standing up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. It was about refusing to let bullies hide behind corporate policy and executive privilege. It was about the simple, radical idea that people mattered more than profit margins. 2 weeks later, Marcus Steinberg was arrested on charges of fraud and computer crimes. The story made the local business news, a cautionary tale about executive overreach and the importance of organizational oversight. Most of the coverage focused on the financial crimes, but those of us who lived through it knew the real story was about something deeper: the systematic targeting of vulnerable employees and the courage it took to fight back. Jessica returned to her position with a formal apology and assurances that her accommodations were not only protected, but valued. Elena received a promotion to Senior Treasury Analyst recognition for her financial forensics work that had made the case possible. Dave was invited to join the company's new Ethics and Compliance Committee, bringing his ground-level perspective to corporate governance. As for me, I stayed in operations doing the work I'd always done, but with a new understanding of its importance. Because someone had to watch the watchers. Someone had to ask uncomfortable questions and demand honest answers. Someone had to remember that behind every policy and procedure were real people with real lives and real stakes in the decisions made in rooms like that 30th floor conference room. The HVAC system still hummed its familiar tune, but now it sounded different to me. Less like white noise and more like a steady heartbeat, the sound of an organization that was learning slowly and sometimes painfully how to be better. Some fights are worth having even when you're not sure you can win, especially then. In the months that followed, the company implemented new oversight procedures, anonymous reporting systems, and regular audits of executive expenses. They hired a new COO who understood that efficiency meant empowering people, not eliminating them. They created policies that protected employees with accommodations instead of targeting them. It wasn't perfect. Corporate culture doesn't change overnight, but it was progress. Real, measurable, human progress. And sometimes that's enough. Late at night, when the office was empty, except for the cleaning crew and the soft hum of computers in standby mode, I would sometimes think about that moment in the conference room when everything hung in the balance. The split second before I clicked to that first slide, when I could have still backed down, accepted the PIP, taken the safe path. I was glad I didn't, because some things are worth fighting for: dignity, fairness, the radical idea that power should serve people instead of the other way around. The belief that in a world full of Marcus Steinbergs, there still had to be places where doing the right thing mattered more than protecting the bottom line. The fluorescent light above my desk flickered slightly, casting brief shadows across the quarterly reports I was reviewing. Outside the windows, the city sparkled with a million stories of its own victories and defeats, dreams and disappointments, people trying to make their way in a world that didn't always make it easy. But sometimes, if you were smart and careful and very, very lucky, you could make it a little bit easier for someone else. And that, I'd learned, was its own kind of victory. The HVAC system hummed on steady and reliable keeping, the air moving through 30 floors of hopes and ambitions and the endless essential work of human beings trying to do better. It was a good sound.